I'd like to preface this with something. About 6 months ago, my pilot from World War II.
The screen was animated by his charisma. He left behind an empire that he built. Paul Newman was a man who was haunted by demons that very few people ever saw. But behind the Hollywood icon was a man. At the age of 63, his daughter is finally breaking her silence and revealing the truth about their private suffering that has been kept hidden for so long. There was a lot of tension throughout the nights. The heartbreaking moments that forever shaped their family are hidden beneath smiles, and the secrets are buried beneath smiles altogether. This emotional and raw story will completely reshape how you remember the man behind the myth. The fight for Paul Newman's legacy, from his struggles with fatherhood to the words he whispered before his final breath, this compelling narrative will completely transform how you remember him. First things first, before we delve into the revelation that Paul Newman's daughter made, let's take a moment to reflect on the remarkable legacy that he has left behind. Not only was Paul Newman a Hollywood legend, but he was also a nominee for the Academy Award 8 times and a winner of 3 Academy Awards. Above all else, he was a devoted family man. He was also a successful businessman, a race car driver, and a philanthropist. Because of his striking blue eyes and rugged charm, he became a prominent figure in the world of acting. However, it was his compassionate heart and sense of justice that ensured his legacy would live on long after he passed away in 2008. Newman poured his heart and soul into everything he did, from starring in classic films such as Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and The Color of Money to co-founding the cherished food empire known as Newman's Own. However, what started out as an adventure to discover the roots of the family took a dramatic turn after his passing. When Newman's Own was established in 1993 with the help of his daughter Nell, it was not only about providing wholesome organic foods, giving something back was the focus. Every single penny of profit was given to charitable organizations, which was an idea that Paul held in the highest regard. Nell, his eldest daughter, was instrumental in the development of the organic food movement and was a co-founder of their company, Newman's Own Organics. She was the driving force behind the introduction of organic pretzels and fig Newtons, which helped bring healthy food into mainstream markets. She was based in Santa Cruz, California. Because of her charisma and her passion, which were similar to those of her father, she became a symbol of the brand. On the other hand, something altered in the year 2015. It was suddenly removed from the label that her image, which had previously been displayed alongside that of her father in a pose that was reminiscent of American Gothic. Shortly after that, it appeared as though Nell had completely vanished from the company. In the case of a family that is so closely connected to the mission of the brand, this move was perplexing. Above the surface, tensions were rising to a boiling point. In the event that Paul passed away, he had entrusted the management of his estate to his close advisor Robert Forrester and his business manager Brian Murphy. Additionally, Paul's daughters had the option of selecting a third executive for the estate. However, this decision broke the family apart rather than bringing them together around the principles that their father held dear. Another one of Paul's daughters, Susan Kendall Newman, expressed her profound concern in an interview with Vanity Fair. She stated that there is not a single living Newman who respects or has faith in Robert Forrester. It was control that was at the center of the problem. The family believed that Forrester had mismanaged the estate, which was worth $600 million, and that he had distanced the company from the principles that Paul promoted. The accusations that were made against him included making extravagant choices and betraying the spirit of Newman's Own. On the other hand, the family's options were limited. It was impossible for them to legally challenge the terms of Paul's will because the will contained a strict no-contest clause. This prevented them from losing their rights to any inheritance. In 2019, Forrester was eventually removed from his position as a result of allegations of inappropriate behavior by female employees. However, the Newman family's trust had already been damaged due to the allegations. A photo book with the title Head Over Heels was the method that Melissa Newman, Paul's youngest daughter, decided to use in order to preserve the memory of her parents in a more subdued manner. In it, she revealed moments of her parents that had never been seen before, moments that were away from the spotlight. Fishing, cooking, and tender gestures between two people who truly loved each other are examples of simple joys that can be shared between two people. Melissa recalled how her father would gently pinch her mother's waist as he passed by, or how the spark that existed between them would never fade away despite the fact that they had been married for 50 years. When compared to the turmoil that ensued in the business world after his passing, these moments stood in stark contrast. Not only were the Newman children fighting for control, but they were also fighting for the very essence of their father's legacy. On the other hand, what is the history of the individual who established such a powerful legacy? Your response might take you by surprise. The secrets that he attempted to conceal. Paul Newman was a favorite of the camera, but the parts of his life that he chose to keep hidden were never brought into the spotlight. A long time after the curtain had fallen on his public triumphs, it was his daughter who would open the door to the past, revealing a side of her father that very few people had ever imagined. Hidden beneath the charisma was a man who was burdened by personal guilt, a family that was in disarray, and a haunting truth that he only dared to speak about as his life was coming to an end. These pieces, which included his drinking, the tragedy of his son's overdose, and a final confession made on his deathbed, significantly altered everything that was previously believed to be true about him. His birth took place on January 26, 1925, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and Paul Leonard Newman was born there. His ancestry was deeply rooted in a variety of different cultures. Arthur Newman, his father, was Jewish and stemmed from a family of immigrants who had originated in Hungary and Poland. Teresa, his mother, was of Slovak descent through her family. Paul was never lacking for material comfort because his family owned and operated a prosperous sporting goods store in Shaker Heights, which is a suburb considered to be of the upper class. On the other hand, comfort did not protect him from prejudice. It was common for anti-Semitism to be prevalent in the neighborhood, which was predominantly Christian. Add a relevant clip here. Not being allowed to join a high school fraternity due to the fact that his father was a religious person was a painful experience that he carried with him throughout his life, an early lesson in exclusion. It was one that would leave an indelible mark on his sense of identity and would continue to do so for a long time. Paul's childhood was not devoid of creative endeavors despite the conflicts that he experienced. In the school play that he participated in when he was 7 years old, he started out playing the role of Robin Hood. Having his first taste of acting at such a young age ignited something deep within him. It was just a happy escape at the time, it wasn't a career yet. Later on, he became a member of the Children's Theater at the Cleveland Playhouse, where he staged plays such as St. George and the Dragon. It was during these performances that his passion for storytelling began to develop. Paul enrolled at Kenyon College in 1943 shortly after completing his high school education, with the intention of majoring in economics. However, his path was disrupted by war, just like the paths of many other young men during his time. Later on in the same year, he joined the United States Military Navy with the intention of becoming a pilot. Those aspirations were grounded in reality when he was found to be colorblind during a routine eye test. Rather than that, he received training to become a radioman and a rear gunner for torpedo bombers. During the year 1945, he was making preparations to join the Pacific Battlefront while stationed in Hawaii in preparation for the Okinawa campaign. His unit was supposed to embark on the USS Bunker Hill voyage. However, at the very last second, his pilot was unable to fly because he had an ear infection. There was a holdup with the crew. When the kamikaze pilots attacked Bunker Hill a few days later, they killed hundreds of people, including many members of Paul's unit. The ear infection had prevented him from passing away. The experience was a close call with death that he would never forget. Medals of service, including the American Area Campaign Medal and the Second World War Victory Medal, were in his possession when he concluded his time in the Navy. However, the most important thing that he realized was that life was fragile and unpredictable. Afterwards, he underwent a profound shift in perspective. A second opportunity had been presented to him. Paul's interest in economics began to wane when he returned to Kenyon College because he found himself drawn back to the stage. It was in the front page, Charlie's Aunt, and the Taming of the Shrew that he demonstrated his talent as a member of the drama club. His portrayal of a man in disguise in the play Charlie's Aunt brought laughter to a campus that was still reeling from the effects of a tragic event. Through the creation of a satirical musical about college life, which he also wrote and directed, he demonstrated not only his talent but also his potential as a storyteller. In spite of this, darker struggles were quietly taking hold of him even as his star rose in public. The making of a legend. Although his brush with death during the war may have altered his perspective, it was the stage that provided him with a reason to live his life with a sense of purpose. Although he frequently struggled in his academic pursuits, acting was the activity in which he felt the most alive. Following his graduation from Kenyon College in 1949, Paul Newman's life took a diversion that was completely unexpected. Following the passing of his father a year later, the burden of responsibility was placed squarely on his shoulders once again. The Newman Stern sporting goods store in Cleveland, which had been extremely successful since 1915 and was considered to be one of the most prominent businesses in the city, was taken over by him. However, Paul did not feel any connection to it. As he continued to drift further into a life that he did not want, he managed the shop for a period of 18 long months. In later years, he would come to the realization that he was not assuming the role of a businessman. He endeavored to escape from it. In 1951, Paul made a courageous choice. Because he was no longer interested in working in retail, on his way to the Yale School of Drama he packed his belongings and left Cleveland. Due to his conviction that he lacked the natural talent required for acting, he initially intended to pursue a career in directing. However, something came about after a year of attending Yale. It became impossible to ignore the pull towards superior performance. He relocated to New York City and started his acting training at the renowned Actors Studio, where he was instructed by Lee Strasberg. There, he gained the knowledge and skills necessary to perform the method acting techniques that would give his future characters a beating heart. In 1953, he was given his first real break when he was cast in the role of Picnic, a play written by William and performed on Broadway. Despite the fact that he had his sights set on the lead role, Hal Carter, director Joshua Logan had a different opinion of him. Rather than that, Newman was cast in the role of Alan Seymour, which was a smaller part, but it was one that put him in front of more people every night in theaters. Although it lasted for almost 4 years, the show was a huge success. While it was not the role he had envisioned himself playing, it was sufficient to open doors for him. Along with the subsequent roles came the recognition that came with them. It was in 1958 when he was cast alongside Elizabeth Taylor in the film Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. His performance was marked by a quiet pain that was hidden beneath a professionally polished surface. There was more to the audience than just a handsome face. A man who was able to reveal the wounds that lay beneath the words was seen by them. Because of his performance, he was nominated for an Academy Award for the first time. Although the film did not win, it catapulted him to the forefront of Hollywood's most talented individuals. Within a short period of time, his piercing blue eyes, which were accentuated by the use of color film, became a part of his legend and were discussed almost as much as his acting. By the early 1960s, Paul Newman had graduated from the status of a rising star to that of a formidable force in the film industry. In the film The Hustler, which was released in 1961, he played the role of Eddie Felson, a dedicated pool hustler who had a cocky edge and a broken heart. Felson was transformed into one of the most memorable anti-heroes in the history of film thanks to Newman's ability to portray both arrogance and fragility in equal measure. In total, the film was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, with Newman receiving one of those nominations. After 2 years, in 1963, he once again stunned audiences with his performance in HUD. At this time, he played the role of Hud Bannon, a rancher who is self-centered and morally deficient. Hud was a new kind of Western figure. He was reckless and empty, and he was much different from the traditional cowboy. The movie was nominated for another Oscar and won 3 of them, including one for Newman. For the film Cool Hand Luke, which was released in 1967, Paul Newman gave one of the most memorable performances of his career. Newman embodied the concept of quiet rebellion thanks to his portrayal of Luke Jackson, a defiant prisoner who refused to be broken. When he smiled defiantly, it became an unforgettable moment. Pop culture would be influenced by a single line from the movie, which was spoken by a security guard. I reminded myself that was quite a privilege and I could imagine, what we have here is a failure to communicate with one another. By the late 1960s, his blue eyes had become a well-known phenomenon. Despite this, Newman never allowed vanity to take control. Here lies Paul Newman, who passed away as a failure due to the fact that his eyes turned brown, he joked at one point. His body of work, on the other hand, spoke more loudly than any headline ever before could. On the other hand, what happens when one's commitment to a single life begins to slowly unravel? Someone else is to blame for everything. Don't stop watching. Love did not bring about a sense of calm, the fire that never went out. It threw everything into shock. Backstage on Broadway in 1953, Paul and Joanne Woodward were working as understudies for the production of Picnic. He had 3 children and was married to his wife. Speaker 4, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward lived together for more than half a century as a married couple. First speaker, the woman exuded radiance, was up to date, and was fiercely independent. There was a potentially harmful exchange involving them, something that always felt like a violation of the rules before it ever turned into love. Their distance was maintained for a period of 4 years. On the other hand, back in 1957, they were cast opposite one another in the film The Long Hot Summer. As a result of art imitating life, the roles became muddled with reality. While Paul's marriage was in the process of disintegrating, Joanne's presence became increasingly difficult to ignore. She confronted him, understood him, and in some way was able to see through the mask that he was wearing. He was impressed by her lucidity and her resilience. While everything around them appeared to be floating on illusion, she managed to keep her feet firmly planted on the ground. Nevertheless, he had to abandon his house in order to choose her. When he made that choice, it would follow him around for the rest of his life. Following the conclusion of the divorce proceedings in 1958, Paul chose to wed Joanne in a private ceremony in Las Vegas. During their honeymoon, they fled to England in the hopes of evading the looks and rumors of betrayal that were being directed towards them. However, the feeling of guilt is not a predetermined emotion. He was followed by it. Paul never refuted the fact that he had caused harm to others, particularly his own children. The damage was irreparable, and he was unable to adequately explain it to them. Remorse lingered even in the glow of a fresh start, casting shadows over happy moments with thoughts of what might have been the case. According to Hollywood standards, their marriage lasted for half a century, which is an eternity. They brought up 3 daughters and established a life well away from the flashbulbs that were prevalent in Connecticut. Despite this, there were imperfections in the marriage. The pull of fame was strong for Paul, and alcohol frequently drew him further away from it. There were rumors that he was emotionally distant, that he was withdrawing inward, that he was haunted by mistakes, and that he was unable to fully articulate his disappointment. However, Joanne remained. She loved the flawed man who was hiding behind the polished actor, not because it was simple, but because she loved him. She was aware of the burden he carried, but she continued to love him. One time he made a joke about why people would go out to eat hamburgers when they had steak at home. This was his way of protecting their relationship from speculation from the outside world. Despite the fact that it sounded like a joke, his wife Joanne was more than just a wife. She served as his mooring. The moment chaos came knocking, she provided him with a sense of equilibrium. She listened through his silences, and she saw the pain that was hiding behind his famous smile. Even with such profound love, however, they were not able to avoid a tragic event. In the year 1978, their world was shattered. Scott Newman, Paul's only son from his first marriage, passed away at the young age of 28 as a result of an overdose on drugs. According to the tabloids, it was yet another Hollywood tragedy. However, Paul experienced it as a form of judgment, as a form of retribution for his shortcomings as a parent. Despite the fact that he had played a large number of fathers on screen, he had not been present in real life. Obscured by the expectations of the public in one's career, it was a private, heavy, and almost wordless expression of his grief. But he didn't talk about it very often, including with Joanne, not even. Nevertheless, he took action. In a matter of months, he established the Scott Newman Center, which provides education to young people about substance abuse. He offered a hushed apology to the son he was unable to save. However, doing good deeds does not solve the problem of guilt. In the past, Melissa, who is their daughter, has stated that after Scott's passing, her parents were never the same again. They did not break as a result of the pain, but it did hollow out something within them. They laid their son to rest, but the blame continued to surface. Paul continued to work. What about movies, races, and charitable giving? However, the specter of Scott's absence remained with us forever. The sound of it reverberated through the quiet corridors of their Connecticut home as he traveled with it. One of the things that could be considered the loudest was the silence that they were unable to escape. In Connecticut, there is a quiet rebuilding. Not escape was what they were looking for, it was nothing but air. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward packed up what was left of their hearts and moved to a more secluded area of Connecticut after experiencing the anguish of losing Scott and the exhaustion of living a public life that was constantly in the spotlight. Not a single velvet rope was present. There would be no paparazzi, nothing but winding roads, towering trees, and a house that was constructed not for display but for protection. It turned out to be their reset button, the attempt that they made to put together the pieces that fame and grief had broken apart. This house was not a lavish one. This action was deliberate. The quiet haven away from the din due to the fact that their family had been cast in the shadows of fame, they brought up their 3 daughters, Melissa, Nell, and Clea, in this location that is not on the sets of movies or in the spotlight of premieres, but rather with books, backyard gardens, and dinners with the family that lasted well into the night. Finally, Paul was able to be present, the man sitting at the kitchen table, not the famous actor on the big screen. The father arrived with hands that were capable of cooking and ears that were able to listen. At this point, he had changed, still in pain, but making an effort with the intention of avoiding a recurrence of the silence that had plagued him with Scott. He leaned into the moments that he had previously overlooked. He didn't have to be flawless in any way, it sufficed for him to be present. Now he was more selective in his role selection, stories that were not merely a spectacle but also carried weight. he had become more human in his ambition, which had become more tender. Joanne Woodward remained grounded even as fame surrounded her and Paul Newman. They lived simply, growing their own food, driving themselves, and letting the world slow down around them. It was a quiet kind of healing, even as the pain of the past lingered. Paul rarely spoke of his son Scott, who died in 1978 from a drug overdose, but his silence carried weight. Regret followed him like a shadow. In Connecticut, he found space to reflect, slowly becoming the man and father he'd once imagined he could be. Just as life settled, something unexpected reignited his spirit, racing. In his 40s, while others settled down, Paul dove headfirst into motorsports. What began as research for a role became an obsession. He trained hard and earned his place on the track, culminating in a second-place finish at Le Mans in 1979. At age 54, in 1983, he co-founded Newman/Haas Racing, once dismissed as a vanity project but soon respected, with over 100 wins and 8 championships. Paul led quietly but powerfully, never chasing the spotlight. Off the track, his mission was deeper. It began with a simple salad dressing shared with friends. By 1982, it became Newman's own, donating all profits to charity, over $570 million by the time of his death. He also created the Serious Fun Children's Network, giving kids with serious illnesses a place to laugh, play, and heal. His belief that joy itself was medicine lives on through dozens of camps around the world. His daughter Clea continues his work, not out of duty but out of love. Paul never wanted praise, just to do what was right. When Paul died in 2008 at home in Westport, Connecticut, Joanne held his hand. He didn't leave with fanfare, but with quiet reflection. He had spent his life hiding deep insecurities behind a charming mask, something he would later reveal in his memoir The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man. He was the blue-eyed icon known as Cool Hand Luke and Doc Hudson, but beyond the fame was a man quietly wrestling with grief, doubt, and a yearning to make a meaningful difference. Today, his legacy is not just in film or racing, but in the lives he touched and the kindness he passed on. It could have been Newman's own food company, which he co-founded in 1982 and which turned homemade salad dressing into a legacy of charitable giving. But which of these two things do you believe haunted Paul Newman more, the tragic death of his son, or the feeling that fame was nothing more than a mask? Could you please share your thoughts with us?